Shall we go? Okay, welcome. I'd like to welcome you all to this final of the spring semester TCIPG seminar. We're really pleased, and if you can see the slides there, we're really pleased to have two people presenting today, Mike Assante and David Tobey. I'll say a bit about them in a minute, but I want to make a couple of announcements first. First, this will be the last, as I said, of the spring semester, and although we'll be working very hard on research and interacting with people this summer, it's tradition to have a summer break for this seminar series. And so we will start up again in the fall, in September, with the next one of these seminars. And we'll all be here working, so we encourage you to come visit us during the summer if you'd like to talk with us on various topics. The second announcement I'd like to make is you should have received a save the date email, but the dates have been set for some time now for our TCIPG Government Industry Workshop. That will be on October 30 and 31, full day on October 30, October 31 half day, so you can get home for trick-or-treating if you'd like. But we hope to see you all there. If you go to the TCIPG website, you will see a preliminary schedule and more information about how to register soon for that event. So we really hope to see you there. We had a really large turnout last year, and I think we've got a set of activities and panels that you'll really like this year as well. Okay, with that, I'd like to introduce our two speakers. We're really honored to have a tag team today, and both of these people, as you can see here, are with the National Board of Information Security Examiners. We have Mike Assante, who should be well known to much of this audience. Mike has done many things, but he has been the leader of cybersecurity efforts within NERC. He's been the Vice President and Chief Security, the Vice President and Chief Security Officer at NERC, and he has also been at Idaho National Labs. Very long bio that you can see if you look online, but I want to give them time to speak. And we have Dr. David Tobey, who's the Director of Research at the National Board of Information Security Examiners, and he also has a long list of affiliations with companies in this regard. So thank you very much to both of them. I'm going to hand it over to them. They'll speak for 45 or 50 minutes, and then as usual, there'll be time for questions. If you have questions during the presentation, use the chat option, as you know, or come to the mics. So thank you very much. Welcome.
Thanks, Bill. Thank you very much. I truly do appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to close out the spring seminar series. So that's an honor. I like to watch the series, and people like Jeff Daigle and others have presented countless research and work that's been done that's very beneficial. One thing I would like to also, thanks for the honor to be here, University of Illinois, and specifically in this campus and meeting with your researchers. It is an important contribution to power engineering, to resiliency, to cybersecurity that you guys do. I've always felt that we've done a lot of work in the areas of energy delivery systems and energy technologies and cybersecurity, much of it applied. And institutions like this and the folks that come to this organization help us look over to the horizon and beyond, and that's very important. Also would like today to, you kept it busy for me. I had a full set of discussions. They were fascinating discussions. Today I want to start discussing a series of cybersecurity metrics applied to energy technology and grid modernization as it relates to competency and the measurement and metrics of skill and performance on the part of human beings. One of the challenges that we have, now my background is typically, even though I did spend time at the Idaho National Laboratory, was in the area of practice as a practitioner. I was a vice president of American Electric Power, focused on cybersecurity specifically to an integrated utility system. And one of in reflection of that experience, and collectively going on through the laboratory and on into my position at NERC, it became very clear to me the importance of the human element to this overall challenge of securing technology, implementing, securing, operating, and maintaining that. And as we go through major efforts and implement technology and modernize our systems, it's becoming painfully clear to the nation across the board that skilled performance, highly skilled workers, and productivity are hand in hand. And in today's global economy, that is an unbelievably important element to success. And I think the country understands that, hence a lot of efforts in initiatives around STEM and a lot of initiatives in trying to increase productivity in the workforce. Now, specific to energy systems, we know we're going through grid modernization. This happens in waves. We've been modernizing the grid since its inception. So smart grid is a terrible name, as the system has already had intelligence and is a smart system. But clearly what is occurring is massive digitization. We're interconnecting and automating where we can, distributing logic and intelligence for us to be able to run a more reliable system. But there is growing complexity with their technology implementations. And of course, with that complexity and interconnection comes cybersecurity concerns and risks that we want to manage. We absolutely have been talking about and focused on developing adaptive technologies and systems. How do we operate in this new reality? And it's also true that we'll have to focus our attention on adaptive and resilient people as well. So one of the challenges we face as a nation is how do we onboard a new generation of workforce in this arena, or how do we transform the existing workforce to deal with the realities of the technologies that we're implementing? And that's one of the challenges that we're wanting to work with other organizations and institutions to take on. It's certainly true that if you look at the cross-cutting challenges associated with grid modernization, one of the most interesting elements of building an intelligence system is that we now have a full system view. We'll think of it from edge to edge. We'll think of it from generation and the information and intelligence that comes out of the generation process, from fuel management all the way to the production of electricity, through the transmission system, interacting with markets and moving power into the distribution system, and now intelligence at the load, intelligence in managing the load side of it. I would argue this shift of thinking has been occurring in the walls between the bulk power system, if you will, which NERC was responsible for as the ERO, and the distribution system those walls have been coming down for years now. But our system, if you look at it in terms of regulation, how we incentivize the system, still recognizes those walls. So a technology reality is occurring that is different, and that transformation is important that it continues to occur. One of those cross-cutting challenges that we'll deal with is cybersecurity, all the way from one edge of the system to the other edge of the system, all the way down into the home or the load. And that's one of those big challenges. From a cybersecurity perspective, another challenge is the growing complexity of the technology that we are trying to manage. Just very quickly, no need for history lessons in an institution like this, but it's interesting that we used to associate a certain processing technology with organizations. If you think of the mainframe, you move to departments, you move to individuals, and now we're talking about tens of billions of devices and microcontrollers, so we're talking about things. Our computing platforms will include embedded systems that will, and it already has begun, to add tremendous complexity on how we manage systems of systems. And with that backdrop, it has become clear that major productivity gains are necessary and accelerated skill development for us to be able to continue to effectively reap the benefits and reward of that technology and be able to manage the risks associated with the deployment of the technology itself. Very quickly, NBISC is a not-for-profit that is focused on trying to meet the needs of the security of our nation's critical infrastructure and our government systems by focusing on measurement science and focus on how human beings perform in order to measure not only the proficiency but the performance and potential of today's cybersecurity workforce and tomorrow's. And that's the type of research that we're interested in doing and working with partners to conduct. And as a part of that, it's very important to engage the academic institutions and research organizations in order to develop a sharper understanding of not only how the human mind works and how the human mind applies to these types of challenges, but also to develop an infrastructure, if you will, where we can share our research finding and information, build libraries together, be able to touch the practitioner community in terms of the procedures and methods they develop, be able to intelligently drive how we will develop cybersecurity tools of the future to integrate in these technology sets. That's the type of work that we're excited and interested in doing. If you ask folks, there's different, in the cybersecurity discipline, and I love working with the technologists and the researchers in particular. So we've identified this people problem. We need to have skilled people in order to be able to stem the tide, if you will, of our current reality. And the technologists like to say, yes, we do have a people problem. There are people in the problem. And I would argue that that is quite a short-sighted view of it. Yes, there are people in it, but if you think through the problem set, this isn't just discrete technologies that have constrained environments that you can model and understand completely writing rule sets for. Someone writes the rules, and ultimately it's a conflict between those who would gain unauthorized access to a system and be clever about it, and those that are charged with operating that system, and those who are charged with trying to protect the system. There's process folks out there who default to practice and their procedures, and their efficacy is we follow those and measure our performance against those procedures and we'll be successful. And quite honestly, many of our procedures have poor measurement to begin with as to whether that procedure actually enhances the security of our systems or not. We probably do not a very good job at monitoring the efficacy of the procedures as time goes on, because procedures are usually designed to deal with a specific something, and that problem moves. And the procedures themselves become constraints. We design a procedure based on some type of a driver, and that procedure actually becomes a box that we end up shaping our understanding of risk and how we perform against that risk. And I would argue in this specific discipline, that's one of the biggest mistakes that we could make. So that's something that we want to avoid. And once a defender or user follows a procedure, you've just played into the hands of a would-be attacker, because it becomes predictable in terms of what your performance will be. So that turns to the people part, and the people portion of it in terms of understanding cognitive process and how to, quite importantly, I wouldn't suggest it's divorced from technology, in that if you understand how human beings are making decisions and how to measure the skill they possess and how to measure ability and how they can perform in a skilled way against a changing problem, which is what we deal with, we have the opportunity to inform technology development so that we can develop tools to augment human performance. So for those technologists who want to remove the people from the problem, what I argue what we're doing is moving people up into the higher parts of the stack, vice having people do tasks that, quite honestly, we could automate or augment their performance. So with that, we've been working on a workforce model, if you will, that begins with definition. Its job one is to actually define what is a job performance model for a certain functional role. It moves from there to techniques to measure that aptitude and competency. And then it should inform everything from opportunities to design instruction and simulation and practice environments for individuals to gain skill, and then all the way through to how do you manage that workforce from a professional development perspective. And of course, ongoing performance support and simulation and the ability to buy tools that build and develop tools. So with that, what we're suggesting that we do, and from a measurement perspective, we're very focused on using summative assessments. Where is somebody? And quite honestly, the approaches that we use as a community is, what does that person know? And what we're suggesting is assessments and measurement instruments should be developed to be formative in basis, meaning what do they know how to do, so that we can actually determine where they are and where we can accelerate the development of their skill. So that provides an individual profile, and David's going to go in specifically into the work we're doing in that field in order to develop some of those techniques. And quite honestly, many other industries have done these types of techniques to account for human performance in the process and be able to develop the performance results and outcomes that lead to either flying more safely or lead to efficiencies and lead to effectiveness. One of the work programs that we have the pleasure to be involved in is working with the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory on a DOE-sponsored project specifically focused on grid modernization and helping utilities to identify the competencies that are going to be important to them in this new grid modernization effort. This work is to provide a foundation for utilities to help them in the transformation of that workforce. It begins with the defining of the job performance models around operational functions for cybersecurity, and it examines everything from technical problem solving, social analytical skills and alike, to the hard, what we like to call hard technical skills, but David will talk a little bit more about that. One of the approaches from doing that is we take a number of subject matter experts that come as practitioners, but also technologists that provide the technology the practitioners need to work around and with, and researchers, and we lead them through a cognitive science process in order to achieve the definition that David will go into details around in particular. Our smart grid cybersecurity panel focused on operational security roles were made up a number of folks representing, like I suggested, both the industry itself in terms of practitioners, but also representing researchers, academics, and technologists who are helping to develop the systems of today and tomorrow. Specifically, we're going to walk through some of our examples we'll derive from another panel that we have that's focused on operational security testing. It was the first work that we have done in this space. But operational security testing is a part of the type of activities that we're applying against the smart grid challenge. In particular, a chair of our panel has written a guide, if you will, focused on how do you conduct penetration testing against advanced metering infrastructures. And this is an excerpt from that. There's a process and methodology, but supporting each step in this process, the practitioner is drawing from a series of skills in order to execute a number of tasks. And the question is, when they're conducting and executing against these tasks, which one of these tasks are foundational? And we say that, I mean, which one of these tasks does not vary in its outcome or performance based on competency level, and which ones are differentiating? And how important is it? And once we understand that, how do we develop individuals to the levels of the competencies they need to be able to perform effectively is some of the work we're doing. If you look at the competency model at the highest level, and this is a high-level map for it, there are several high-level domains in that, things like identifying critical vulnerabilities, a series of hundreds of tasks that fall and align underneath this construct. And the model is actually is dimensional, and David will actually touch on that. But we'll use this security testing model throughout the presentation to give you an idea of the type of work that we're performing and where we'd like to go with that. So, with no further ado, I'm going to turn over to Dr. David Tobey and continue to talk to you about this work.
Right. All right. This next part, I'm hoping, is the beginnings to a dialogue. We believe that there's been a lot of myth about how people function that unfortunately constrains our abilities to improve their function with technology, but also to understand what the implications are in terms of the vulnerabilities the human machine creates in the energy environment, smart grid environment, and others. It may be the greatest vulnerability. You know, oftentimes Mike kind of alluded to the fact that we sometimes treat human behavior as the weak link. Right, and as we all know, a system is only as strong as its weakest link, and we often think the human is that. And so, if we could just get the person out of the way, have less people and more computers, we'd have none of these problems. But as we all know, computers aren't very good at dealing with anomaly, at dealing with unknowns, unpredictability, where people are extraordinarily good at that, very creative. So we use terms to describe that. And as researchers especially, one of the things that's most important, as we all know, is we have to define our terms. And yet in this particular space, which I've spent my whole life pretty much around the area of what is expertise, how does it develop, how do you transfer it, the three words that everybody uses, we all do it, myself included, is knowledge, skill, and ability, and we intermix them. We talk about knowledge as though it's a skill. We talk about skills as though they're abilities. And we've not created a good definition to it. So one of the places I started was, well, what the heck are these three things? And indeed, they are very fundamentally different. Knowledge is your degree of understanding of a topic. You can gain knowledge through training. But you cannot train a skill. Skill only comes through the application of knowledge in sufficient diversity and sufficient time. Some, including a Nobel laureate Herbert Simon, suggests that it takes 10,000 hours of practice before someone can actually develop a skill, a true skill, or an expertise skill, a master level skill. Now, that's been questioned over the years since he made that statement, but what is absolutely clear is that skill is about consistency of execution. So while knowledge is about understanding and can be developed through training, skill, or that ability to create consistent performance, only comes from practice. And then finally, ability is taking skills and knowledge and applying them in a domain that is new, novel, or in some way fundamentally different from the setting in which they were first developed. Now, why are these three important? Well, it causes us to question some assumptions that we all make. One of the most important one is that skill is always good. We just want to create more skills. We want to find skills in the workforce. We want to train skills. We want to grow skills. Well, if skill is about consistency, and indeed neurologically, which was my research work, was initially focusing on, let's find this stuff in the brain. If skill is encoding an habituated pattern that creates consistent performance, which indeed it is, then I could be skilled at being mediocre. I could be skilled at using the wrong process at the wrong time in the wrong way. That's okay.
Internal webcam.
Internal webcam, there we go. So what we're really focused on is how do we know that the right skills are being used at the right time? And to do that, we have to start with what are the things that people need to execute? What really does create effective job performance? So as Mike mentioned, we bring panels of experts together. We use a specific set of brainstorming techniques that enables them to start to release some of that tacit knowledge that is critical to understanding what really is skill. And then we rate these varying things in terms of how do they differentiate the performance of someone who's entry level into the profession, an apprentice, if you will, someone who's at an intermediate stage of development in the profession, a journeyman is the way it's frequently been used in the past, and someone who's an expert or a master of the trade. The difference in which they perform, or the difference in which that task, allows us to understand where they are in that learning curve, is fundamentally important in order to understand how to measure those individuals. And oftentimes in the past, we have made conjectures about people based on, as Mike mentioned earlier, foundational skills. Things that really don't differ in terms of the way they're performed or the outcome that's produced, regardless of where I am in that range from novice to expert. Yet some other tasks are fundamentally different in terms both not only of the outcome that's produced, but literally the process that someone executes as I change from becoming a novice up to an expert. And that's probably one of the most important findings that's come out of expertise research over the last several years. So what we do is we take these varying task models, and there are hundreds and hundreds of tasks that an individual might perform in any one of these cybersecurity settings, and we array them along two dimensions. The degree to which that task is critical to perform, and the degree to which it differentiates individuals in terms of their development in the expertise curve. From that, we can derive path models that indicate those tasks which actually make a difference. Those things that fundamentally separate individuals in terms of the outcome they will produce. And when you do this, it's an interesting thing that seems to always happen, that apprentices tend to be very good at certain aspects. You know, everybody's an expert at something. And they become experts at some aspects of the job first, and then they develop other aspects that they become experts at later. So in this particular instance, in the case of operational security testing, one of the things that we discovered through this process was that they first gain expertise in performing tasks safely and lawfully. Which, if you think about it, makes sense because it's ingrained in them to think about the policy implications and they need to follow the procedures and protocols that others have laid down for them when they're first learning about a profession. As they mature, they begin to develop skills in the area of identifying and penetrating targets, identifying critical vulnerabilities, and exploiting those vulnerabilities. But what really separates the masters, the experts, from those who are in the mid-career development are those who can manage projects, educate the team and clients, especially understand the real-world impact of the threats and vulnerabilities that they're identifying, and then be able to recommend mitigating actions that are going to be most effective. So we begin to array individuals according to the types of tasks they should be performing at their level of development. The next step, though, is to now convert this into a set of instruments, a set of tools that can enable people both to self-assess and to be assessed in terms of where have they progressed along this continuum. And again, they need to fall in three different areas. We need to measure if indeed knowledge, skill, and ability are different dimensions. We need to measure them differently. And so knowledge, again, is measured by the degree of understanding or the degree of difficulty or the amount of investment I've made in either in hours or in self-study or other things. Consistency is measured by a confidence factor. It's a very subtle thing, but the reality is when people are skilled, they can no longer tell you how they do what they do. That's one of the sure signs, right? In fact, we created a phrase for it. We call it tacit knowledge. I should put a giant tacit knowledge on my wall because my whole life has been about figuring out what the heck that is. Right? Because to me, it was all hand waving. Oh, it's tacit. Well, can tell me more about it? No, I can't. It's tacit. It's like it's a secret or something. Right? Well, it's not secret. It's not that the expert doesn't want to tell you what they know. They no longer can. Literally, neurologically, their ability to execute has moved to a part of the brain that's no longer connected to the language centers. That's what I discovered in my work. And I call them thinklets because like applets, they can be combined together to create very complex programs. But individually, they are nothing more than an instantaneous activation of a set of neurons that enables somebody to perform that discrete component. And that could be a very simple thing like riding a bike, which we all can relate to, or something very abstract cognitive thinking like coming up with a theory of physics. Each involves components of the brain that require literally no conscious reflection, which is why they can't tell you what they know. But we can abstract that with things like the frequency by which they perform certain activities, their outcomes and behaviors that they execute along the way, the sequence of events they use, hence the sequence of thinklets that they activate. We can also look at their abilities by looking at planning and monitoring and other types of problem solving or situational judgment activities. The result of this is an ability to then start to drill down on the capabilities of an individual or an organizational team that's involved in a security effort. So this happens to take the operational security testing area, and in this example case, you could see an individual might not be so well developed in mitigating vulnerabilities, has an average level, a yellow area there for penetrating targets, but currently is doing an excellent job in terms of exploiting vulnerabilities or identifying vulnerabilities. Now, some of the softer skills, like managing projects, communicating and educating, and assessing impact, they have varying levels of capability, again, along an array of different tasks. So by drilling down on any one of these areas with the tools that we're putting together as a result of our research, as an example, penetrate targets is a composite, really. Oftentimes, the things we call skills and the lists that you see of people's jobs, they tend to be these short lists of very high-level things. Can play well with others. Well, what does that really mean, right? How do I drill down on what that really means? So penetrate targets drills down, as it turns out, into foundational elements like identifying ownership of gateway devices, identifying recon that is within a project scope, searching online sources, etc. But those are the things that everybody should be able to do. What really differentiates performance in this area is being able to analyze data found on compromised machines, identify major assets subject to attacks, and for each one of these, there are levels underneath those. But what's fascinating from this work that we're doing is that somebody can be overall fairly average, the 54.9 that this person had an overall score, which put them right in the mid-range of a group of penetration testers. And yet, how that is derived is very different, individual by individual. This particular person had extraordinarily good results for identifying ownership of gateway devices in terms of the raw score. But everybody had that level of high score, hence they were just average across the entire population. On the other hand, they had a relatively low score of a 36 in terms of identifying data found on compromised machines, but that objective score was very common among people that did security testing. So just somebody's score in an exam doesn't tell you anything. You need to be able to drill down a step further. And so in the tools that we're developing, when you click on a particular one of these areas, like Identify Recon, at the bottom, you get to understand, well, how really did they get that score of 46? Turns out this individual would have very high knowledge of what to do, but they hadn't practiced it sufficiently to develop the skill at executing. And hence, while their overall score was a 46, it really was comprised of an 86 score in knowledge. They were in the 86th percentile in knowledge, 27th in skill, and mid-range or 47th in ability. Now you have a clue as to what type of intervention might aid this individual in terms of improving their ability or their competency at that particular type of task. Since they're high in knowledge, putting them in a training class isn't going to help. They already know what to do. They have an understanding. They can follow the procedure. They can probably recall it as long as they're not under stress or duress. But in order for them to perform well, they need more practice. Conversely, somebody that showed a low knowledge score clearly needs more training and education on what are the right things to do. Now, obviously, that leads to personalized education programs that run counter to the way a lot of education is done today. Putting everybody in a classroom together that had varying levels of knowledge, skill, and ability doesn't work real well if you really want to maximize how far they get up the curve and how fast they can get there. To support that, then we leverage a model that was developed by the International Center for Leadership and Education. And it basically crosses the levels of knowledge or the path you need to take in terms of developing knowledge, and the same thing on skill and ability on the x-axis there. And what results in is there are different implementations, different interventions necessary during the acquisition mode, which is quadrant A, the bottom left, the assimilation mode, where they're beginning to take that knowledge, assimilate in the process of executing a series of activities, the application of that across a broad type of problem. So the first is just assimilating it in relation to a very small number of cases, whereas the application area in the bottom right is practicing it and applying it across a broad array of varying dynamic situations to the point where they can create adaptability or adaptive response, which is a quadrant 4. So the tools we're creating allow us to now map individuals against that. So we have foundational knowledge in the bottom left. We have foundational skills in the top left. We have differentiating skills in the bottom right. And then in the top right, in sort of the ultimate quadrant 4, we have now the manifestation of ability. However, again, note that each one of these is breaking them down by the task. So where you see like the red X's, that's one area of performance. That might be something like the example I gave earlier about penetrating targets. So some aspects, they have very high ability. In fact, generally, if I looked at this, if that was penetrating targets, this would be very high ability person. But they still, even within that, have a few items, in this case, one item that is just at the foundational knowledge stage. They have some tasks that they've developed, some foundational skill, but are only differentiating themselves in a few select areas. In effect, creating a skill profile or a map of each individual. From that, we can develop a set of very specific personal development plans that take task by task, area by area, and look to accelerate learning curves. DARPA recently did a study of this as it related to network administration. Utilizing these techniques where you focus the right type of intervention on the specific task that individual needs remediation for, they were able to take individuals who were in the lowest quartile on the ASVAB. If you're familiar with ASVAB, it's an intelligence test, basically, that all military personnel are required to take, at least in all Army. I don't know if everyone does. And they scored in the lowest quartile. So in theory, these weren't the smartest group, that they had in the military. And within 15 weeks, by DARPA's estimate, they produced individuals who were the equivalent of people with 15 years of education and experience. Within 15 weeks, they created 15 years of experience. It's called accelerated proficiency. Why is that important? As I've been around the country, and I was at a talk, for instance, I gave a talk at the National Defense University, and throughout the course of a 2-day workshop, I heard over and over and over that we need 1,000 cyber ninjas, or we need the best 10,000, or the best 700. Everybody was arguing over what is the number of top-tier cybersecurity people we need. And that's what all this should be about, is finding who are the best of the best. Now that's important. I don't want to minimize important. That's extremely important. But this concept of expertise research goes back a long way. The first one who did this type of accelerated learning program was a guy named Plato. Now he had a little different approach to it. He started out by breeding the right people, finding parents that could create the world's best warriors. And he put the combination together of parents, and they took their children, typically they were Spartans, and they put them in a special academy to train them how to be great warriors. And by every estimate, even in today's standards, Plato succeeded, because we remember them to this day. They were the 300. They made a great movie. We all respect their warrior skills. But we forget one very important lesson from the 300. They lost. Every single one of them died. The Greek civilization fell because they could not withstand the power of 1 million Arab warriors who were far less capable, but outnumbered them manyfold. We don't need to simply reduce the number of the qualified through certification exams and other things. We have to find a way to accelerate the numbers of the capable. And the point of this research, we hope, and the dialogue I hope for us to have here shortly, is about how do we do that? How do we develop better tools that can augment their capabilities, so if they get to a point where their skill has become saturated, where they've become consistent at performing at an average level, that they can be augmented with technology that helps them get to the next highest level. That we develop a set of research that can figure out, well, what are the right procedures? How do we even know what they're supposed to be doing? And what is the order in which they should be doing it? What are the tools that they should be using at each step? Most of this is unknown. People do it haphazardly, or they develop their own proprietary approach to doing it, but it's not widely shared. So to support that, we're developing a set of management tools. Again, the whole idea of this workforce planning system is to make it freely available as a set of libraries throughout the community for research use, for obviously organizational use, for licensing to organizations, to handle task assessments or individual assessments, organizational assessments, and then feed that into a standards-based library we call ADAPTS for Advanced Defender, Aptitude, Performance Testing, and Simulation, that we would make available as a SCORM library. So for those of you familiar with SCORM, it's a standard for online learning, but more importantly, it's a standard way using XML of identifying configurations of learning programs, instructional materials, and delivery of those instructional materials, assessment instruments, and simulation configurations. So by making these libraries available to the research community, we hope to accomplish two very important things. One, to obviously identify gaps in our knowledge and in our capabilities as a nation in terms of what do we know about these varying areas? Do we have libraries? What would they contain? What are the best practices in each of these areas? But secondly, we hope it also allows us to begin to validate the approaches that right now are assumed as valid when they come out of the research community. How would we validate them? Well, luckily, we have entered into an agreement with an organization called the U.S. Cyber Challenge, which is now part of NBISE, and it gives us access to tens of thousands of individuals who are competing every year in cyber competitions. As a research community, those are a lot of lab rats. But we've never had any way to get that data in a form that could be useful for testing out varying tools or varying methodologies or techniques that we want to assess. Now, with what we're trying to do with US Cyber Challenge, with the support of DHS and others, we're going to create a standard library of measurement instruments and a way for us to aggregate that data and access that data and make it available to research and to use that opportunity to introduce experimental techniques, experimental tools, and see what their actual effect is on individuals performing in a real live attack, but one in which doesn't involve, obviously, high stakes. So with that, let me just kind of summarize where I think this effort is important, what contributions we can make to this group and potentially to others. First, we'd like to think that the models that we're creating to truly understand what predicts performance. We're not talking about descriptive models here anymore. We're trying to say, what are the factors that actually make a difference in terms of someone's ultimate performance in producing secure posture or improving security posture or addressing a specific incident. So we're facilitating the translation of what most people view today as functional roles, high-level things like they're an incident handler. Well, what does that really mean? Into specific jobs, specific tasks that they need to execute. The second thing is to clearly differentiate knowledge from skill, from ability, and provide measures that enable you as researchers to know what you're impacting. Are you improving somebody's knowledge with this particular outcome of this research? Are you developing skill? Are you expanding somebody's abilities? then determine the factors that differentiate those performance at varying levels of skill so we can see what the effect of introducing new techniques and technologies on the learning curve. And that will ultimately lead to a model that not only describes but prescribes what ought to be done in specific situations and enables us to measure the effectiveness of doing so. So in the end, we hope that JPMs will help to determine who should be developed. Not everybody's going to have the right aptitude for this profession. But I would submit to you that we're currently making mistakes in assuming, in many cases, that those who have aptitude must be STEM students. Again, something I hear all over the country is we need to get more STEM students into these programs. Well, everybody wants the STEM students, right? I mean, all engineering programs, all math programs, all science programs, we're all fighting over what is a dwindling pool. And yet, we may find that those who have the greatest aptitude for this profession, I've seen it in some of the cyber camps that US Cyber Challenge runs and the competitions, are art students, are literature majors, are social scientists, God forbid, like me. They don't necessarily come from those traditional science disciplines, but they have the problem-solving abilities that enable them to have an aptitude to accelerate their development in this profession. So then we have to figure out how do we develop them. And that's where those skill profiles and understanding where somebody is in terms of their knowledge, in terms of their skill, in terms of their ability to address specific tasks. And then to take that next level, and instead of worrying so much about performance-based testing, of which there's an awful lot of dialogue going on today in the community about that, and moving it more towards performance-based learning. So with that, I probably filled up your brain to the point of explosion, and let me turn it over to questions.
I will add real quick before questions. Not being a historian, but I did stay at Holiday Inn Express last night. Therefore, I know that the Greeks actually weren't decimated. They quickly had a series of victories after the incident with the Spartans. But David stayed at Hampton Inn, so he doesn't benefit from that. So, and to bring that back around to smart grid tech and grid modernization is what makes it a very attractive field is it's a greenfield opportunity. We have the challenge as utilities in particular in the practitioner community to try to develop a new set of methods and skills that are required to operate in new architectures and new environments. And so being that we're in this greenfield opportunity with technology, it makes a very good research environment for this work to be done in, and there's not as many sacred cows, if you will. So with that, I guess we'll open up to questions. You can join me up here.
Carl Reinhardt from the University of Illinois. I'm trying to connect the dots in your organization and understand how you fit in. I mean, your title says National Board of Information Security Examiners. So I'm curious, who gives you your charter? Who approves your mission statement?
Yeah, and we're really, fundamentally, we're really a research organization and evaluation research. So we're not an authority, if you will, for certification for the reasons that David talked about, that we didn't see it has a place, but that's not where we're trying to push the research. So we don't have for example, we don't have a charter set up by legislation like an ERO would with standards. We're really doing complementary research for the ecosystem or the community, if you will, everything from people who are doing credentialing and testing to folks that are developing education and development programs. The work that we do so far has been project-based, so working with either different agencies, or we do have grants with the Department of Homeland Security and National Science Foundation. So we're really a research organization, vice a standard-setting type of organization.
Hi, Derek Daggett, Illinois. One of the early slides caught my eye. It said genetics on one of the rows. And I was wondering...
Yeah. Yeah, let me get there.
Like a two-part question. Is that used as a heuristic for your models? And if so, I'd be interested to hear about any of the solutions to ethical challenges that might have come up.
Yeah, I probably didn't set up this slide well. That is is in reference to other industries that are moving in that direction. That slide came from the National Board of Medical Examiners and their movement to actual skill profiles. So if you take a look at the what they're measuring on the first column, clearly that doesn't align necessarily with cybersecurity. You've got cell biology, immunology. This is being used in the medical practice and field in order to develop skill profiles for in this case, the doctors or the folks in the educational process that are working towards becoming doctors. But what was important, and the point we're trying to make, is that industry has moved from proficiency achievement-based only to developing measurement instruments in order to provide this type of a view of where somebody is in their development. And this is what we're arguing is probably the direction as a discipline cybersecurity would like to move to, is this more holistic understanding of where somebody is in both knowledge and skill across these different domains. You give a more accurate representation. Achievement exams, specifically when used for different things like licensing or certification, you end up with you either are or you aren't. And the tendency is to say you're not qualified to do something is the objective of such an approach. And an idea like this is you're giving somebody a profile where they are, whether that profile is a good one relative to some performance, some job opportunity or job that someone is being evaluated for. It has far more fidelity to make a determination like that. So sorry for not giving you enough context. That is a medical measurement outcome for an individual.
Tim Yardley, University of Illinois. A couple comments and just soliciting your opinion on these. First off, the difference between training or what the sector needs in terms of utilities. Utilities need defenders rather than penetration testing, which you've mainly talked about the ability to attack in this. Can you speak a little bit about the ability to defend or how that plays in first? Absolutely.
A lot of people would argue to be able to mount an effective defense, you should understand the process on how to attack a system. But we only showed you a slice of, and by the way, the information on David's one slide was illustrative, so it wasn't necessarily showing real scores that came from an instrument. But we used the OST model. It was the oldest model. We began to work on that in 2010. So the functional roles there that were being measured was red team, commercial penetration testing, and blue team. And blue team had to understand architecture and how you put systems together. The other panels that are involved in the more recent work that we're doing include an incident response handlers, intrusion analyst, and security operations specialist, for example, or network security administrators. In those cases, they're much more focused and geared towards, instead of how to attack, form and formulate a strategy and execute tasks to attack a system, they're far more weighted towards how do I set up architecture, detect activity that's not appropriate activity, how do I launch a series of executions to respond. So in the model, we kind of forced you into thinking about, we showed you attack information, but the truth is we're trying to do this work across the board, and utilities will need a combination. They'll need the ability to test their own architectures and systems, whether they get that from the outside world or internally, but they certainly will need the skill sets to detect, monitor, and respond to those events. And work we haven't done that we would hope to do would focus on roles that have to do with engineering, architecture decisions, development, coding. Those are areas you could still do this work for. All the work to date, the customers have wanted to focus on operational security roles.
Sure.
Let me add one other thing to that. One of the most important pieces of the work, I believe, is, as I mentioned, is that criticality differentiation matrix. The most critically differentiating skill for the security testing group was one I believe will apply across a broad range. It was knowing when the tool you're using is giving you inaccurate or inappropriate information. That was the most important differentiating skill that anyone could have. Now think about it for a moment. If you think about experts, how do you know somebody's really an expert? Well, they can tell you when the tool they're using or are proposed to use is either the wrong tool to use, or is not being used in the right way, or is not working in the way that is giving them the information that would be the most helpful. But you have to know a lot. You have to have applied it an awful lot in order to know that, in order to exhibit that skill. And that's irrespective of whether I'm on the offensive side or the defensive side.
Okay. And one more real quick comment. You mentioned about having knowledge is obviously something that is of great benefit. However, practice is something that actually proves out to be the most beneficial or in the end. And I think that definitely rings true. But in the utility sector, I think one of the things that or actually I think this is endemic of most sectors, one of the things that I've seen most evident is that they don't have the systems necessary to detect attacks, and then they don't have the people with the forensic ability to even go through the necessary systems and logs to find out what happened when they do.
Right.
And those are the areas, even when they do have that experience, or even industry-wide, those experiences, those techniques, those tools, that knowledge is severely lacking. It's easy to learn how to exploit a system or to do something simple like SQL injection or buffer overflows, but it's a lot harder to learn how to recreate events and reproduce attacks and determine exfiltration of data, exploit channels, etc., especially in the face of a crafty attacker. And through things like Anonymous and other stuff, you see that the barrier of entry into most companies is very low to be attacked. But the repercussions of that and the ability to determine what happened and how they got in and then clean up the mess is very expensive.
Right.
Can you speak a little bit about the efforts and quantification of training on that aspect of it, where the money scale, obviously protecting yourself from attack is a dollar figure associated with cutting off the insurance per se of it happening, but the impact of it is huge, and especially in critical infrastructure, it's even more. And I think with this particular case, we need to worry more about cleaning up quickly and making sure that we protect ourselves in those response cases, rather than worrying too much about the attacks.
Right. It's great. It's a great question. And it's actually an observation that led me to move into this field with NBISE and try to participate in the collaboration for this work. The reason being is I did notice when I had worked before I went to NERC as the Chief Security Officer, in my dealings with other customers and other problems, one of the challenges was to look at highly, what they say, targeted or structured threats that were occurring. And a lot of this occurred to government systems and occurred to the defense industrial base as an example. There was, no one coming from a utility background and still working with the utilities very closely, there was a big stark difference between the composition of the teams and the skills and the roles of the teams in one context that have been dealing with the structured adversaries and threats, and the compositions and skills and competencies find out in the critical infrastructure. Now, the first context had pretty advanced detection technologies, and through experience, they were able to realize they were dealing with a very different type of security challenge, and they had 2 years by that point, about 2 years dealing with and managing through those, and they developed different procedures. There were home-growing tools, quite honestly, to try to become more effective in the early days. In that sense, you've seen some tools develop around how they were trying to tackle that problem. But that didn't translate or transpire over to the power industry. It wasn't, right? And so, and then you look at that and you say, well, what helps facilitate that kind of knowledge transfer? That something has changed so fundamentally that you might need different skills and competencies to deal with the reality that either these people figured out because they were able to see it. You probably, unfortunately, are in that same reality, but maybe you just haven't seen it yet because you don't have the detective capability. Yet you weren't able to detect the activity, and we've since proven that true. We've had those same issues now in the energy infrastructure that we're grappling with. And part of it is because there's such a lack of definition, you couldn't even relatively measure to say, there is a difference, until you could look back at it and say, why does this look so differently at a kind of a common layperson's view? You can now start seeing the differences were so stark. So the reality is we're hoping that more definition will lead to more rapidly being able to see where changes are necessary, because the world of cybersecurity is very dynamic. And so for us to be able to build models and continue to monitor those models to see if they hold true is very important, so we can make shifts more quickly, right? It can be more agile. So I think that's very important. And some research that you guys are doing around optimization of decision making in terms of the investments required of what is a good decision to a detected situation, to best manage something to an outcome that means something to a business, as an example, or means something to a national security system, is a very interesting one. And I'd argue that an element that we do less around is understanding the constraints of the competencies that you have to optimize that decision. That response might be different when certain competencies are present in a team, and different when there's other competencies. And so the optimization model would even change. And we're hoping that this work will lead to being able to bring that human element into the optimization model based on competency.
Yeah, let me add two other real quick things. Tim, that was a really very insightful question because, part of the challenge in this space is that events are rare and the resources are dear. And so you certainly can't go out there and take down a nuclear power plant to get practice. Not a good idea, right? But they've had that same kind of problem in other industries, right? It's a real mess if you land a plane inside a river, like the Hudson River. So how did the guy do that? Well, he spent an awful lot of time in a simulator simulating that problem. But the key thing about that simulator, going back to how do you train people, how do you do this, it's a bit counterintuitive from a traditional education standpoint. You got to teach them mistakes. Think about that. The way we educate oftentimes is normatively. Here's how you ought to do this. Here's how you ought to do that. Here's the best way to do this. Here's the right procedure for that. How about here's how you screw up. And let me have you screw up again and again and again and again, because it's only through the feedback loop associated with that practice on error that I develop that skill. We have to create opportunities for failure that are learning experiences.
So this is Rakesh from University of Illinois. The last slide where you had aptitude, and you're mentioning a lot of art majors being found to have a lot of aptitude, just struck me because a very prominent security person I heard through rumor is an English major. And last night I was looking at the profile of a person who started a security services company, was very successful, acquired by a major security company, now is co-founder of another security services company, and I look up and they're an English major. So, I mean, if your findings do, check out when you do this US Cyber Challenge that, a lot of these people here are aptitude, it'll be interesting. Maybe we should hire more art students as a research assistants in our programs. But what's more interesting is, what I was getting at is, what is that defines or develops an aptitude or something for this space? And I want to see if there is something specific to arts that does it that maybe STEM folks don't have access to.
Yeah, I think it tells you two things. One, there's no jobs for English majors. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, one thing I'd suggest to you, which I don't think is going to be, excuse the term rocket science, is creative problem solving. Right? We all know this profession needs and rewards creative problem solving. But the type of creative thinking that occurs in some of the softer sciences, shall we say, can be much more elaborate than even what occurs in an engineering profession. So that may be alone. And what these instruments are intended to identify are those types of aptitudes that we can both develop and identify outside the domain of a specific cybersecurity issue, which gives us an ability to take a broader cut and look at a broader array of people.
So Prosper, just one quick question and one quick answer, and then we have to answer.
Yeah, Prosper Panompabi. If you can go back to slide 2, I believe. I know what is a resilient power system. I know what is maybe a system fault tolerant. Can you please define for me what is resilient?
Resilient people?
In terms of attack or defense. And my last question is, we have come together to the point that we have to teach our kids about the cybersecurity stuff. We have to go into college. The question is how far we can talk to our kids about the cybersecurity of the power grid without making them scared. Do you have any experience you can share with us?
Okay, I'd argue that second part of the question is a good response to what are resilient people. Resilient people demonstrated they can operate at the appropriate level of competency with the problem that's in hand. They're getting the right amount of input to be able to work in that plane, which means they can be highly adaptable, okay, to the problem as it's changing because we're in a dynamic field, but they're resilient in that their competencies are right fit for the situation you put them in. They're not going to get overwhelmed or under duress because the situation, if there's a competency mismatch, if you will, then the resilience of people start to decrease. In fact, when people get stressed and stress response, a lot of research scientists, people actually lack up and get paralysis. And we know that human factors, looking at operators and how do you present information in a way that you avoid that, cognitive overload and get them in a situation. If they don't have the skill to back that up, they're no longer resilient. So giving them the tools they need or helping them develop their skills might be part of it. As far as kids go, that is an interesting. I remember when I grew up, you had Safety Town going there, and hey, scary stuff. We didn't show them if you did something wrong, you went to driving remedial school. They showed you blood runs red on the highway. You didn't show that to a 5-year-old, right? You went to Safety Town. You were still talking about the same dynamics. You didn't want to get hit by a vehicle, but you're teaching them all the fundamental skill, the knowledge they need to have and the skills they should perform in terms of checking, looking both ways. I think we do need, in the development of kids, we think about college. I'd argue probably it's too late to maybe identify some folks who have an interest in helping develop them. You have to start going deeper into the system, into high school and beyond. And there's a general issue of a general technology user needs to be equipped with certain fundamental knowledge and certain skills, typically fundamental skills, that they're going to need to be able to operate in the new reality, which is even their personal lives. So, it's a challenge for any parent. I'm a parent of 3. I watched my 5-year-old get a hold of my iPad and I just kind of shudder. I don't know how you even control the behavior on an interconnected World Wide Web anymore. So, these are issues that I think absolutely need to be tackled from an educational perspective.
So I'd like...
You said short, that wasn't short.
That's okay. I don't know if this one's off. On? Okay. Okay, I'd like to thank Mike and David for a really engaging seminar. We've got to end, and we look forward to seeing you all back in the fall. Thanks very much.
Thanks.